Hello, I'm Niles Kin and President and COO of Murphy Leadership. I will be your moderator for today for the free webinar, Become a Triage Leadership Master and Run Toward the Roar of Personal and Team Success. Before introducing today's speaker, let me review a few operational details before we begin. Please send your questions throughout the presentation, and we will be doing a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Once the webinar is ended, a window will appear for you to open a survey. Please take a moment and complete the survey if you will. We appreciate your feedback. Audio for the webinar today is streamed over the internet and is available through your speakers on your PC. If you are in an open office, we recommend you use headphones. Today's session and PowerPoint slides will be posted for you and be sent to you by way of email. Please feel free to share this archive with your coworkers and friends. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter. Dr. Emmett Murphy is the author of 14 books, including the New York Times bestseller Leadership IQ. He is also CEO of Murphy Leadership, a training and consulting company specializing in special professional development that focuses on increased performance and innovation in the workplace. He has extensive experience working with staff from the C-level to the rank and file in such organizations as Walmart, IBM, and other brand name companies. He has also worked extensively in healthcare, serving such organizations as the Harvard Medical School, Brigham Hospitals, Voluntary Hospital Association of America, and others. His current research and consulting focuses on increased courage and innovation in the front lines of leadership. He holds a PhD in organizational psychology. With that, let me introduce you to Dr. Emmett Murphy for today's presentation. Emmett?
Well, thank you, Niles. And my mother thanks you also. Today we're going to talk about mastering triage leadership in order to run toward the roar. And here's a picture of my friend Apollo from the Cincinnati Zoo, and I was about going to play you the roar from this guy. It's really terrifying, but we thought better of it, perhaps a little bit too dramatic. Anyhow, here we are today. We're going to talk about a key finding, the key finding, in fact, of the research we have, we're still continuing, but pretty much wrapped, and in January. We started in 2007, to look at the question of how leaders were being effective in these tough times. And we've been in this field now 35, 40 years. And I must say this brought tremendous clarity. And we have never had times like these. And such, the bad news is obvious. But the good news is you get a lot of clarification going on, especially if you're going to study it. Triage leadership is what's emerged. It is the technique by which people sort through the tough issues and face the risk. In fact, all leadership starts with risk. One of the great findings is realizing, if you look at leadership literature, you will see virtually nothing on leadership starting with risk assessment and being driven by the concept of risk management throughout. That doesn't exist, yet all the other professions begin with that. And that's one reason why leadership, in many ways, is not a true profession, because it hasn't had the rigor, the scientific precision, and the willingness to look at things from risk forward. We're going to change that with triage leadership, which gives us the capacity to face the roar. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well. First, however, I'd like to address up front some of the issues you raised in your registration information. Can you use this kind of approach in dealing with office politics? Politics relies on word-of-mouth gossip. It relies on distortion. We're going to focus on an assessment today that looks at what happens in the organization and puts issues on the table in a very transparent and data-driven way. That's the way you deal with office politics. You deal with substance, not the gossip. What about dealing with things when you've just realigned or restructured, or you've reinvented the corporate team, as some of you have said? Well, this gives you a way to mobilize things. If you've restructured and really believe that what you've done is wonderful, one of the things is you need to know what you've done. And oftentimes people don't assess things and document what they've done. We're working with one major hospital right now in Florida where that is precisely what we're doing. Been so successful. But right now it's word of mouth. Let's inculcate it into something that's tangible and reminds people what we did and why we did it. And assessment does that, and then leadership training does that. In fact, those are the two things that are immutable objects. You must assess and you must train if you believe in what you're doing. How do you deal with the integrity issues? Again, integrity is a function of credibility. Credibility is a function of evidence. Show me the evidence. And, you know, Reagan, back when we were doing the nuclear stuff, would say, trust but verify. Today, we're seeing the same thing occur, whatever side of the aisle you're on. Neither party seems to be willing to really trust or trust by verifying. Training within the team. Training today must be focused on results and performance, and again, must be driven by the reality of the risk. Now, there are other things that you've raised in your interests and the things you've indicated you're interested in, and most importantly, at the heart of all of it is this credibility issue, because you can't deal with any of the others if there isn't credibility. And what we found was leaders wanted to be credible first and foremost because they wanted to be able to believe it themselves. The theme here is to be able to run toward the roar, to trust what you're doing and know you've made the right decision. It starts with data. Let's start with a little mini triage assessment. Here's one for you. On a 1 to 7 scale, now that's going to be very important as we go forward. It's also what the research tells us to use these days, is answer in your, just make a conclusion here. Do managers in your organization spend 60% or more time in the front lines of work, actually engaged with the people they're working, directly engaged with them, dealing with issues and working with them? 60% or more time in the front lines of work. 1 to 7. 7 yes, 1 no, 4 so-so, 5 a little better than so-so, etc. 3 not so-so-so. 2, do clients say they will return? They will buy again, they will return to you for your services 95% or more of the time. This is a case where 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points really means something. And think about that. Yes, do they? Will return 95% of the time. Now, if it's 93 or 94, you might think that's a 4 score. If it's 95 or better, give yourself a 7. A 4, 94, give yourself a 6, a 5, and so forth like that. Are innovative employees rewarded? Flat out. Do you recognize innovation and say that person really has made a contribution, helped us think this thing through, in a very helpful way, made a contribution? Now, these, it doesn't have to be the Nobel Prize inventor. It can be anybody at any level. Are they rewarded? Do executive practice what they preach? Now, we've asked this a million different ways, and finally people know it when they see it, and you know it when you see it. Do they practice what they preach? Are the right people doing the right jobs? Boy, this is a question of alignment we'll talk about. And is the organization better off today overall than it was 3 years ago? Has it been progressing in a positive direction? And that's saying a lot in today's world. That's a really tough one. Now, I was going to ask you all to raise your hands, but let's imagine we're all doing that, Raise your hands up. And how many of you have scores that are better than 5.75? 5.75. If your score is better than 5.75, you're heading towards, really good territory. And the challenge there is to maintain it. If it's 4 to 5.75, in that kind of range, or 3.5 to 7.5, 5.75, you know that you're on the cusp, so to speak. And below that, call. call either way. But we're on the cusp. If you're on the cusp, you want to catch it before it slips any further. And invariably, there are very good things going on inside the organization. There is something leveraging it down, some types of things. And you need to find out what. If you're doing well, you need to know why you're doing well, reinforce it, and really understand of all the hundreds of things that you could be doing, what are those things or are doing, what are those things that really are predicting what you're doing well. And of course, if you're not doing well, that speaks to it itself. What we've done here is looked at 6 factors that are actual predictors of success and are actually correlated to financial results, to brand integrity, customer loyalty, to retention of top performers. These are, we can actually show statistically how they relate to those performance indicators, and that's vital. So these are 6 of what you'll see are a host of ways to look at the organization. What's interesting is you start with an assessment in order to understand risk. Triage means to sort through and set priorities. We know about it in the battlefield kind of stuff, where you go out, this person has a chance to live, this one doesn't need our help, and this one we can't help. Well, that's triage in its raw and its most basic form. Triage also means establishing priorities. And any physician today who would take a patient into surgery without doing a triage and a full risk assessment, it would be thrown in jail. I mean, it's that simple. One physician said at Mass General and Harvard Med School where we were working, and he said, you know, if we did what leaders do, we'd be thrown in jail. There is no risk assessment. We don't set priorities based on evidence. And there you go. So so fundamentally, as we went through this study, we came to conclude that it is, in fact, risk that is the problem. And it is the challenge, because risk undiagnosed and unassessed creates confusion. And it's that confusion which is the challenge, and clarity is the answer. There's a wonderful lesson from the Serengeti. On the Serengeti, warriors are taught that when you hunt a lion, you run toward the lion's roar, not away. And here's why. When lions hunt, they hunt in prides. 12, typically 12, maybe 10, 12 to 20 lions. 20 would be a large group. The oldest and often most toothless male is sent to the head of a herd of game. And there, after the rest of the pride has positioned itself at the opposite end of the herd, typically downwind of the herd, the signal is given to the some way to the big old male standing up at the other end to stand up and roar. And he does. He roars as loud as he can, whereupon the game turn and flee from the roar right into the trap laid by the rest of the pride of lions. It's a very efficient way to hunt. Everybody runs away from the roar. Warriors are trained not to run away from that roar, because whenever they're dealing with lions, the safest place is going to be running directly at it, because the options are going to be greater there. And when you get up close to the roar, often you find it's a toothless old lion, and you might be safe and dodge away. But whatever, you're going to know better how to deal with the risk by facing it. And that is the wonderful analogy that has led to our titling this Run Toward the Roar. The research tells us the same thing. We looked at how the question for us was how leaders in mainstream organizations were meeting practical business challenges during the period we've been in. Actually, it's 2007 to the present. I messed up there. I apologize. And who among these leaders was able to maintain high profitability, customer loyalty, innovation, because that's a future, internal stability, employee relations, and so forth, and mission focus? who actually knew why they were doing what they were doing and able to sustain that vision through actual work. It was a study of 982 businesses, healthcare and services, public service organizations. We started with over 20,000 leaders in this assessment. Fortunately, we've had a network of things established through our various research, which we do for ourselves and for clients. We have a team of researchers who've been working with us for many years, State University of New York, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Alliant University, and some other groups who assisted us at this time. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and if you're working with us, you'll probably meet them. What are the lessons from that research? We learned that successful leaders are characterized most by triage leadership. This is what we call the mega lesson. Unlike a lot of other research, one simple thing really emerged. When you were in the presence of the most effective people, there was no question. They were constantly triaging everything, understanding what's working, what's not, and why. And as we analyze, we start to understand the variables they were keying into. Intuitively, they'd done what statisticians call regression analyses or factor analyses, which are even more comprehensive. And they've understood where you had to look. What were the high beta things to look at in an organization to know whether they were all right? And they understood those things, tweaked those things, created that de facto experientially driven scorecard, which we found statistically we could explain. They followed a process driven first by assessment, a formal what does this assessment mean called diagnosis, and then they said what does this mean for me if I'm an owner of business, the CEO, a vice president, a director, what does it mean? And then they translated into action. The action phase of this is fascinating because think of management as triage driven rather than some academic telling us how to, and I must apologize, I am an academic, I was at many times, but you know, those of us who dream about writing something just to dream of, to write it, well, these folks are saying when you solve conflict, if you're taking a triage approach, your first thing you must do is to control for contamination of conflict. When you look at it through the filter of triage, your script and strategy becomes different, more efficient, more focused, elegantly simple and easy to teach and implement. As we go through things today, I'm going to tell you that the results tell us there are two fundamental things that we have to do. We have to be able to assess and diagnose. We have to be able to act. And to do both of those, we have to own. So it really becomes very simple. I'm a little older now, and I must say this is simplified leadership in many ways. It's a complex affair, leading in today's world, and therefore the core melody that drives us must be simple. Think of Beethoven's Ninth, the choral part of the symphony. Bop, 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 very simple melody. Think of a jazz band. Think of a great football or soccer team. Very simple. Focus on the methods, focus on the core strategy, and then you can get fancy in implementation. Here's our core melody. You assess, diagnose, own, and act, or put in the context of our lion. You've got to hear the roar, face the roar, own it, and run toward it. So the mega lesson is triage, and the specific lessons are that first the roar signals both risk and opportunity. It's risk, we're subject to change all the time. There's no such thing as certainty. We know that. And change provides an opportunity. And the second lesson is you run toward the roar through 4 steps. Hear it, face it, own it, and run toward it. Let me walk you through each of these 4 steps. You've no doubt already seen my little lion down the right-hand side. I get carried away with slides. There are 55 in this deck, which we're going to send you. That's more than people recommend for the program we're doing today. What I'm going to do is dwell on the ones with lions, and you'll see mostly 1 lion, but also occasionally 2, which means that's really important, and 3 means it's super important. Step 1, hear the roar. How do you hear the roar? Well, we have in our operating database, we have 1.5 million subjects in a what we call the psychosocial factors, and we have 500 and some odd thousand in the world's largest activities-driven database, which is used for productivity and financial analyses of work. And that we began working in a joint venture with General Electric in 1990, and it's the world's largest database for healthcare. Won a lot of awards and stuff. Out of that, in this study, we have developed what we call the operational scan. The triage operational scan is the non-sexy technical terminology we're putting to this. It's much nicer to say it's a ROAR readiness assessment. What it consists of is statistically proven indicators that are correlated to real-world results, real profitability and loss, real turnover rates, real innovation rates. So what we know is an organization to survive has to have a body of physiology and anatomy that works well in terms of expectations, connection, achievement, and awareness. And we're going to look at what the optimum side of this is in a bit, but it consists of 12 subscales that interacting tell us where the organization is at. I'm going to show you an actual graph of results, for example. And one of the things you'll have an opportunity out of this program is if you want to take this assessment for yourself as a sample, as a test, Niles will tell you in not too long from now how to do that so that you get a feel for this. But this is an assessment that's used at any level for teams, individuals. In coaching, we often do this so people get a picture of where they are at vis-a-vis their organization. We also do it with teams, but we also do it with mega organizations. One time we did this with 43 hospitals nationwide involving well over 50,000 workers at the same time. That was an earlier version, 10, 15 years ago, but the fact, and which gets tweaked and tweaked and tweaked. So we know that these issues are critical. We know these subscales are critical. You can see I'm moving through a non-lion head. When you get the deck, you'll see that awareness deals with mastery demonstrated in adapting or evolving. Expectations, what we intend to do, what we say we're going to do. Humans are expectation-driven creatures, and therefore without clarity in our expectations, we simply are lost. Our connections, without that, the belongingness and that sense of being involved in something together, we cannot practice reciprocity, which is the essence of evolution in human, evolutionary survival. And without achievement, we move nowhere. And achievement is financial success, it is doing work well with superior quality, it is doing it efficiently, and of course, as I said, awareness leads at its highest level to adaptability. We also know from a triage point of view, and this is why we developed the scale, wherever the scores are, and we tested this in numerous ways, we all know that it's going to help us predict where we are from a risk point of view, dealing with the existence of the organization, the stability of it, and the achievement. We're all probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's much recent research by many different people, and you'll be hearing that, you'll be getting that kind of information in a bibliography that will be sent to you as we go through things. This is when we look at those 12 indicators, or those 4 categories, broken down into what they tell us about our survival potential. We have our expectations, our connection, achievement, and awareness. And at its highest level, when we reach a higher level of achievement, our triage level has told us we're now at high levels of opportunity. We have achieved hope, ownership, mastery, and adaptability. And at the lowest levels, we have reached contempt, hostility. We will, with what we're doing, do harm. You're probably aware of the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And then when we are disabled, not being able as an organization to keep sense of where we are to innovate and develop. What we are at level 4 is uncertainty. What we've done with our assessments is make it possible for clients to understand without a lot of ambiguity what the results mean. We've matched the statistics to common sense words, and the items in there are all concrete behaviors that actually impact the bottom line, customer satisfaction, actual quality of service, and in the case of clinical environments, which impact mortality and morbidity, actual predictors of what are called sentinel events and other things like that, of nosocomial infections, of what's called C. diff, which is a type of infection in organizations. What are your likely prospects of having clinical breakdowns if you're in that kind of environment, or operational breakdowns if you're in a business environment? When you put those things together, a meta result occurs, and it is courage. How else do we describe what happens with the SEAL teams and the Medal of Honor winners? Those are very visible ways of explaining that survival and success in a military arena is also the result of expectations, of hope, of mastery, in the achievement area, of adaptability, and most important, of ownership, personal ownership. The same thing with great healthcare providers, great engineers. So if you look at organizations, we can see it in these new, from Facebook and so forth, but if you look at an Intel, you'll see that kind of behavior in an Andy Grove and Gerald Moore, or in IBM today with Sam Palmisano and the history of his evolution into that role. All of these people and others, Marlisa Mooney, who headed the world's largest healthcare consulting group, international consulting group, you will see that these people manifest mastery, adaptability, ownership, and the sense of high focus and high sense of what they're doing and why. Now, as we go forward here, we want to talk about the fact that when you do an assessment, it is important to have different views. When we looked at the metaphor and the stories of warriors in Africa and elsewhere who evaluate risk, we find out that they look at it in different views, and they're taught how to view the organization, their situation, their environment with different cuts. And so, for example, there's an organization-wide cut for us, so we can see everything. Or we need to drill that down to processes, roles, and structures. Or we need to look at it, our place as an individual, and that's probably where we start. And then we need to look at unique key issue factors. How will this impact my relationships, my job security, etc.? Or in other ways that the data suggest. One of the techniques we found to be very effective in this regard is what are called sample symptom cluster analyses. These are where various variables come together and tell us that there are profitability issues either going to emerge. We're familiar with leading and lagging data from Robert Kaplan. And in most of these data are actually leading indicators, will tell us that profitability will become a problem if we don't address certain issues. Customer focus factors that tell us what's going on there. One of the things I like is the contrast between creative dissonance, where things that are going on are not impending conflict, but rather creative dissonance, and knowing the difference. Productivity misalignment, when people aren't doing the right work, has terrible consequences, including stress and other related issues which have healthcare costs. Guidance effectiveness of management. I like to think in terms of management as a guidance system, as a cybernetic guidance system in an organization. Here's one that clients came up with, squeezingness. This is when we have the tyranny of software. And we've got the kind of new sweatshop situation where people are like a toothpaste tube and they end up being squeezed out, and where they spurt can be messy. The hypocrisy risk. This is where we're saying one thing but doing another, and sooner than later, in a situation where humans exist, you get this tremendous dichotomy and division that leads, well, it leads to tough stuff. The roadblock crash predictors, when things are going to fall apart, and disconnections. These are the sample. What happens is if you have an array, you're going to be given the chance to take an assessment that has about 100 variables in it, a very long version. It can be customized, and I'll show you how in a moment. But and with fewer variables, because statistically they're not all that necessary, you're going to be given the chance to do a very substantial thing and take a look at them all, because some of them are teaching variables. When you do this, however, some get scores of 7, some get 2, some get 6, 5, 3, 1. And when you put this all together, even if you have only 25 people, or if you have 100 or 10,000, what you get are correlations. And when those correlations start to connect to each other through what's called a factor analysis, and you start to see the relationships and which ones are influencing the others, and the next thing you know is that while they were in these specific scales, something from the vision scale is interacting with something from the connection scale, is interacting with something from, is the work being done right, interacting with an innovative scale, and a variable. And you start to see a special cluster of things, and you ask, what does that mean? And we found that these are the kinds of themes that come out. They're specific predictors of very real situations. And pull up for you to look at an assessment. Here is a sample of a feedback report for the readiness assessment. And here you'll see, for example, the basic model we were just discussing. Here you'll see a kind of radar graph of where the overall organization is, and this is one that has, as you can see, innovation issues are lower, but development, focusing on the current development of current products, the current skill levels of people, is relatively high. However, it is not focusing so much on the future. The quality of what's going on is presently high, and so forth. And you can go through the diagnosis. I get carried away with that. I apologize. Or you can see it in this fashion, which sometimes seeing it in a different way reveals differences more clearly. So within that subset called adaptability, we're seeing that change per se is much lower than the development, that we're not focusing as much on that, and the more specific issue of innovation is being significantly statistically less emphasized. In fact, anything with 0.37 or more is a statistically important difference. Excuse me. Now we take that and we move along, and if I go into these, I'll get lost and we'll never get done. But you can see that each item it has its own score. I'll just pick one. I feel ready to meet the challenges change may require. 6. Management understands the changes they are likely that a change is going to create. 4.8. Associates across all levels are involved in assessing risk and opportunity. 3.4. So I individually feel ready to meet change, but across the organization, risk and opportunity, that is change, is by definition, is not really being recognized. So you've got some issues there they're going to have to check with. And when you get to issues like the actual standards of the organization, are they being maintained? Now we see standards are applied consistently across all levels and areas. Oh boy, not so good. Yet I always know whether my performance is where it should be. So we have a dichotomy there between the individual and the organization. The quality of things, service is well coordinated. Ooh, where coordination drops off, and there are sub-issues under that, we all know what the consequences are. So you can start to see how these patterns reveal themselves. Then we, of course, look at the outliers, the 10 highest, the 10 lowest, and we look at, in our case, we always provide what are called high beta comparisons, and those high beta comparisons are those of the most statistically alive variables in that particular data set. When you do this work, you realize one size fits one. And that's why when you must take your own blood tests. You can't look at somebody else's blood tests to decide what's going on. Your own radiological images and so forth. You can't look at someone else's. This is one size fits one. And where it's good science, you can actually see what's going on inside, just as with a good CAT scan. And this is an operational scan. Now, these results are not going to show you the symptom patterns today because this is just a quick review. Here you can see on the upper left, this is where the organization is doing well. On the lower right extreme, that is where the individual feels doing well. The upper right is where there's convergence, ready to go both ways, great alignment. Lower left, where there's not so good alignment. And you can see that dot moving around. Now here's one where I make decisions with the best interests of customers in mind. Red tape never impacts the way we do things, which is decisions are not being made with the best customer intention in mind. We can show you those correlations. So we have a misalignment. We have the beginning of a significant misalignment. Here's another one. And there's a good alignment. So what an individual can do is spot where they are vis-a-vis the organization themselves. Niall's going to tell you in a little bit how you can actually, if you want, take this assessment for yourself within your own organization. It's great fun to do it. It's a marvelous exercise. It's a great personal preparation. But you can also get a sense of whether it will work in your organization. And he'll also tell you how you can do this in your own organization. Here is a courage readiness overall. We want to translate this into terms people will understand so that they understand where the organization is in the capability to win the Medal of Honor or to really go after the Major Quality Award, the Baldrige Award, or something like that. But more importantly, when you hit that 6.3 or above, you're going to be making profits, building friends with your customers, mobilizing your staff to a high level, and you're just plain going to be creating a new future. It gives us a tangible way to think of where we need to go. The report is designed, the whole assessment is designed to be a tune-up, a physical, a way of understanding what's going on. We saw that in our research, that's what great leaders did. And they knew where they stood, and they brought that assessment to bear in ways that made tangible differences for their organization. At step 2, we take that data, and we then create a diagnostic picture, work it through to come to some point of action. We've learned that there's some really wonderful axioms here about doing a diagnosis. It's safer to face the roar together. One of the things is often executives do this in isolation of each other and isolation of front lines. Why do it that way? When in fact, with an assessment like this, you do not have to convince people. They participated in the assessment themselves. Larry Andrews, a wonderful CEO, once said to me, the real reason I'm doing this is so the assessment can tell everyone what I think, what I know already. I mean, it's not that I don't learn something, but if I stood here and told them we have to do this, and this is because of this, till I was blue in the face, they wouldn't believe me. But boy, by participating in this highly focused operational assessment, they understood. And when you measure and diagnose together, you believe together. There's a very interesting thing. In God we trust, all others must use data. And in pluralistic, market-driven, democratically driven societies, we don't believe it. I think our problem with politicians on both sides is they keep spouting out their mouths, but they don't offer us real solid data, and they use data to lie. And one point of view instead of the balanced point of view. When you generate data together, you'll believe and act together. You'll receive in the deck, you can look at these methodologies for processing this information. And what it really leads to is also a risk assessment after you get a plan together. You pick a solution, you work it through to create a plan, and we have here front-loaded some of the things that we ultimately do when we have to act, when we come to the conclusion that we must respond. And we've learned that it isn't enough to create a plan where you take all the data, move it, squeeze, filter it down from observations, issues, risks, opportunities, solutions to response. You must translate that into a concrete response. What are we going to do and who will do what? And when you do, that's not enough. You must then evaluate whether it's worth the effort. that system of coming across to you. All of this is preparation for step 3, which is, will we own that solution? Will we take responsibility for it? And we have learned that that is a critical step. The warrior decides, will I really run to the roar, or am I just going to try and get the heck out of here? One of the things that shapes the warrior's decision on the Serengeti is that, quite frankly, when the lion does roar, to try and run away from the lion is to literally increase your risk dramatically of being lunch. Not having lunch, but being lunch. So you do run toward the roar. We can find ways of dodging in many cases in our organizations. And of course, if we don't diagnose together and we're not in it together, we're likely to find ways to dodge. But if we follow steps 1 and 2, we're ready to own it. What we haven't done, and the difference we saw in the research, is that managers actually ask their individual subordinates, listen, will you be able to own this? Will you be able to take this solution and act with it? What we've done is translate that into a script. And that script addresses the levels of existence, stability, and achievement that individuals face. And we hope with the level 4 of courage being the result. On an individual level, we use the script, and with a team, we use the script, and with a CEO, the CEO asks people through the script to assume personal responsibility to own the solution and act on it. And that is done through a process that is driven by 4 questions and how to use those questions. I'm not going to go through this now because of time pressures, but the script is going to be in the deck, and if anybody would like to talk about it with me personally, in many ways this is where things hinge. They hinge on this face-to-face ability to act this script out in very positive terms, and that leads to the 4th step in this process. One of the things we learned is that when you're running toward the roar, you actually have to manage the roar. You can't just turn it over and walk away. That's where the 60% figure comes in. We found in these benchmark organizations, the most successful managers were there. They recognized one very powerful finding. If you were to pick one thing and only one thing to focus on from this presentation today, know this, that your workers want their managers present. The biggest complaint is my manager isn't here to help me. People want their leaders. C-level people want their CEO. People below directors want their VPs. People want their leaders. And in a pluralistic society, we want our leaders more than in an autocratic society. Last night I happened to watch a 3-hour thing on Russia's history. It was just too fascinating not to watch it. A study in, since 400 AD, a study in pure autocracy. And its tradition is so strong. The problem is when the top guy is knocked off, there is nothing to hold the rest of the place together, the rest of the society together. By contrast, in our society, and increasingly in developed societies throughout the world, leadership is distributed. Power is distributed throughout the society. Every leader counts. You count. I count. Every leader counts. And what is lacking is that emphasis. So when you have this diagnosis and assessment and you realize what needs to be done, then how do you translate into action? Well, that is the focus of Run Toward the Roar management skills, which has been put together in a toolkit. One of the most wonderful results of the research has been really focusing on these scripts. There's so many ways to teach things, but from a triage point of view, it comes down to the following. Over 80% of what is going to happen in an organization is determined by 8 distinct, what we call roles. The selector role, the connector. In fact, I just put this here. It's the role, stupid. When it comes down to what do we do, all of us are actors, And we either have a role and a script, a good script and a good role, or we have a lousy one. A lady I had a great fortune to study with when I was in high school. I grew up in a town called Hyde Park, Roosevelt's hometown. And every year a high school kid was allowed to, for a few years while Mrs. Roosevelt was doing it, work with her and study with her. And it was just wonderful. But one of the comments is, all the world's a stage, Shakespeare said, and whoever has the best role wins. She thought she and her husband had the best roles you could ever ask for. And in the Second World War, she said it was about leadership, acting their roles properly, acting out their roles well, so that those they were with were inspired to act similarly. And in terms, if you don't have faith in your role, it's dead. It's failure, just as St. James said. So without the roles and the skills, things really go to heck in pretty fast. The 8 roles we found emerged from the research are pretty understandable. The selector, connector, etc., problem solver. They each have a distinct script driven by triage, and then one of pulling everything together so the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That script was unusual, and we found that senior executives had that ability to pull things together, and we put that script down. Each script is driven by a priority. So in selecting, it's about the best fit, not the most popular, not the prettiest, not the smartest per se, etc. It's the best fit. And the focus is work-life history. If you're going to get one piece of information, that's the information you get. There are a lot of ways you can interview, but not all of them matter. And from a triage point of view, when you're looking at existence, and then you're looking up to stability, and then to achievement, you will build up from work-life history. Connector, tuning in, is the core objective, the priority. Ownership is the priority, and tuning in is the focus. That's what you have to do when you're doing. Now, we could study all aspects of communication, but if we don't zero in on what's going to help build ownership, we're not going to get anywhere. So what we've done in this way is reshape the field of leadership development. The research tells us what we should be teaching, where we can get the biggest return, and how we can engage our managers and help them to feel competent in this tough and complicated world. Well, there we have it. Each of these 8, you'll be able to read through them yourself. You'll have this deck. And now we come to the question, how do we pull this triage program together? How can you effect this? Now, I want to say up front, we're not going to have time to speak too much about leadership development today, and I asked you to call Niles or me personally to do that. But now I'm going to turn this over to my partner, a good friend, who's going to take us through how can we test triage leadership and take action on ourselves. Niles?
Yes, Emmett, thank you very much. Really appreciate that intro. And really, how do we test triage leadership? How do we move forward to test it using the Run Toward the Roar program? Well, we do it painlessly, with low risk, and with a guarantee. But there are several levels or several options to the program. There's the individual option that Emmett discussed. This is the level 1 program. And there's also the organizational program. Each of these have their pros and cons, and some of those were alluded to when Emmett discussed them. The pros of the level 1 program is that it assesses your alignment with your organization. And as a consequence, it is the assessment of your organization seen through your eyes. And that really leads to the cons. The cons is being, in fact, your view of the organization, but still you're able to assess how you fit in that organization and better understand your role. So that really leads us to the organizational program, the level 2 program, and the correlation of different variables that really only can be done when individuals in your organization take the assessment and the data is compiled so that variables can be compared. So this is an organizational wide assessment. This assessment also has pros and cons, and this is where the Triage Leadership Master comes into play. Because really what we do is that in the organizational development program, we train you to be a triage leadership manager. In fact, the program is set up so that one can assess and then reassess your development or your progress without really much help from Murphy Leadership. So this is a program that you can set in place and continue to reassess, much like a physician would examine one annually in their annual physical, so to speak. So it's a program that is available to you. The pros of this are you see the risks and the opportunities of the organization, of course, from head to toe. The con is if you don't want to know about it, you don't want to measure it. I mean, frankly, it's that simple. It's one of those things that you may be able to, you may be uncovering things that, well, you may not want to know. But on the other hand, there are situations, of course, that are very valuable for you to understand. In fact, some examples of this, and we, of course, we have a lot of history working in healthcare as well as outside of healthcare. Only showing you two here, but at Hammond Medical Center, as an example, the return on investment for the organizational program was 15 times their investment. Just as important, and some would say even more important, was in this day and age of nursing retention, the nursing retention rate increased 70% in the first year after the assessment was implemented. And not too insignificantly, and this is a fact, this is a documented fact, that hospital in Erie, PA saved $44 million in instituting this program. Another area, another company that we worked with was World Class Shipping. Their profitability increased 42% in the first year of implementation with a return on investment of 8 times. So how do we move forward with this? Well, believe it or not, we do have a guarantee for the organizational program. The organizational program is fully refundable if we do not meet 3 times your cost of investing in the program. However, the return on investment is typically 10 times cost. 15 times cost is not unusual. Why do we have a guarantee? Well, we have it because we know in this economic environment, organizations need assurances that programs actually do work. Besides, we also have, relying upon our experience and referrals that we can provide, testimonials we can provide, Murphy Leadership is confident this program will also work for you. So, to move forward with any of this, please contact Emmett or myself for the organizational program. And remember that it is a 3 times cost guarantee. To move forward with the other program, the individual program, I'm providing you a link to these programs so that you can sign up for them, as well as more information on an organizational program. Also, in the same email, I'll provide you information so you can receive the slide deck and also a link to get this on-demand webinar. So we look forward to working with you. We look forward to helping you master the run to the roar and take control now and become a Triage Leadership Master. Thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to working with you. We've got the experience. We would feel that it would be a privilege, frankly, to be able to help you to implement this program. For Murphy Leadership, thank you very much and look forward to working with you and participating with you next time. Take care.